and get rolling, okay?
Okay.
We've got 16 people have signed in. I'm sure they'll, they're wrapping up and signing on. So all of you who are currently listening, my name is Gay Timmons, and I'm the chair of the board for NOHBA, and I also have a ingredient distribution company called OO Organic. There's a couple other board members on with us today, Janelle, and I think some others signed up. And of course, Erica, who has been a fantastic support. She's kind of helping us accomplish everything. But NOHBA is a completely volunteer organization. So sometimes things are not perfect, but we're getting there. I think we're getting better and better at what we do. A couple of announcements. If you are not a member, we would really love you to consider becoming one. We will make these webinars available to the public for a certain period of time to non-members, and then I'm not quite sure how we're going to proceed. It's not super expensive. It's $250 a year for the entry-level membership, which is where most people are. And I think the value is fantastic. All of these webinars, which we try to do anywhere from once to twice a month, go up on YouTube, so you have a reference there. Additionally, you can log into a member space where we have written summaries of various kinds of regulatory information that may come in handy. The next webinar is, what's the date, Erica? The 10th? February 10th?
Yes, sorry, February 10th, yeah.
That's okay, I know you were probably on. Okay, so February 10th, that's going to be done by Dr. Larry Weiss. This is our, we're having only doctors now. And Larry, who's a good friend of mine, will discuss microbiome. He's worked on microbiome issues for longer than anybody else I know. He developed the Mother Dirt product line. He worked also on Clearwell, early on, the Thymol-based hand sanitizer, hand cleaner. And he is now in a company called Symbiome, which has some very, very interesting ingredients coming out of South America. And he'll probably mention that a little bit, I would suspect, when he talks about microbiome. Today, we have Dr. Nadim Shaath. Dr. Shaath, we love him because he gives fantastic presentations. Today he's going to talk about sunscreen testing validation and a little bit about what's going on at FDA with regard to the regulatory process. Additionally, Nadim has a whole line of essential oils, and probably the most beautiful book on essential oils that you can get. And if you have one, you can, it's in the background, isn't it? Behind you, Nadim. Right.
Right there.
Right. So with that,
sunscreen stuff.
Any other announcements, Erica? I think that's it. If you have one other request, if you you can put in any kind of questions on the Zoom little chat box. Also, if you have specific subject matter that you would like us to try and put a webinar together for, we will. We've had presentations from people who do all different kinds of certification, from vegan to NSF 305, all kinds of different approaches to, we've talked about recycling, we've talked about packaging, we've talked about all kinds of things. So let us know what you need. The goal of NOHBA is to support you and give you access to the information you need to grow within this clean, green, innovative space that we're all trying to live in right now. And with that, Nadim, take it away.
Okay, good. First of all, I'd like to say hello to Jason, a good friend of mine. In fact, I'm going to be talking just briefly on one of the ingredients that he's been developing. Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here, and I hope that you're all doing well and staying safe. And what I want to talk about today, at least Agay had asked me to really address this topic of sunscreen testing validation. Why do we see numbers variable all over the place? In other words, They're supposed to be 50, but when they're tested later on, they may be 30 and 35. So there's some discrepancy with SPF testing. And I've actually written a column which is going to be published in a couple of weeks, and it will address this issue in particular. All right, so this is the outline of my presentation. And again, you're welcome to interrupt me at any time. This is a casual setting, and we have a smaller group, so I should be able to answer. If I'm going to be mentioning it later on, I will let you know. But basically, I want to talk about the safety of the ultraviolet filter. That is the heart of a sunscreen formulation. So a cosmetic, a sunscreen product without a filter is just a cosmetic. But with a filter, it becomes a drug. And therefore, there are some issues related to it. So we will look at the safety of the filters. And then we want to, once the filter is inside a cosmetic, it becomes a sunscreen. And we have to do some performance testing of the sunscreen to show that it does have a certain SPF. It may have some water resistancy. It may have broad spectrum protection. It may be photostable. There are a number of things which we call performance testing of sunscreens. And then I'll just briefly give you an update on the sunscreen industry. I spoke about that in my previous webinar, but I will give you an update. So basically, when you go out in the sun and you are subjected to some radiation, which is the sunlight, it's ultraviolet, visible, and infrared radiation. When you get those, your body has a mechanism to get rid of the damage, the potential damage from the solar radiation. And it does that by what we call endogenous chromophores. There are things that will actually absorb those rays and in many ways make them harmless and will not cause any damage. They include nucleic acids in the DNA, they include amino acids, and most importantly, they include melanin, and that's what makes the tones in our skin. Now, if you are sitting longer than your body can handle, and of course, people are different. Some people can handle a lot of UV radiation or infrared radiation, others cannot. That's why some will have successful mutations and that can lead to cancer. Others will be able to get rid of it with the mRNA and all that stuff. But if you're getting exposed to more radiation, then you're going to need an exogenous chromophore, which is basically either your clothing, or you're avoiding the sun, or you're putting an umbrella, or you have hats or whatever, but it most probably will be a sunscreen product that you put on your skin. So that is just the basis of what we're talking about. And sunscreens in industry are a number of products. They could be the products for the beach or for skiing. We call them recreational products. They're generally inexpensive and have some protection, wide range of protection, usually high SPFs and usually a lot of aroma. Then there are tanning products where, you know, if you don't want to go and be exposed to the sun, you can use tanning products. They're like artificial dihydroxyacetone that causes a discoloration, which gives you the glow feeling. But they generally have some UV filters to protect you if you're out in the sun. Or what's becoming more popular is daily wear products, which are, you know, lotions, or moisturizers that contain SPF, because we think that you need a daily protection, not just when you're sitting on the beach. And then finally, the anti-aging products, which contain antioxidants and other ingredients, in addition to the UV filter that will help you protect your skin. There are after sun relief products, you know, which contain the lidocaines and the aloes and the essential oils that help in the relief. And lately, we've been seeing some ultraviolet filters in clothing and some ultraviolet filters in hair products to prevent the discoloration of dyed hairs in particular, as well as other properties in there. So any product that has an SPF on it, or if you want to, you want to launch a product and put an SPF on it, that immediately takes it from the realm of cosmetics into drugs. And this is governed by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and they have very clear requirements which are issued in their monograph. Now, we don't now have a final monograph, but we have a lot of tentative ones which either you're familiar with or I'll briefly mention. So the safety testing from the FDA, let me first say that the FDA looked at sunscreens in 1972. It became popular that there are some products on the market, but they were not regulated whatsoever. So they set up a panel, and in 78, they came up with this ANPR, which is the advance notice, and they grandfathered 21 ultraviolet filters that were in commerce at that time. My company submitted actually 2 of those ingredients. And so this is way back in 1978. So they were grandfathered. No testing was done. They were relying on the suppliers. What we gave them was all they took. And they did like a preliminary thing. They had a panel and they approved 21, which they called Category 1 filters. Since that day, since 1978, there was only 3 new filters that were approved, which was zinc oxide, which, believe it or not, was not one of the 21 filters. Only titanium dioxide was. They added zinc oxide. And 2 others came through a new drug application, which is avobenzone, a UVA filter, and one that is only proprietary to L'Oreal, which is called Ekamsu. Nothing else was approved. Now, since that day, a lot of changes have happened to the 21 filters. They're not with us anymore. Some of them are. All the rest are either deceased or do not exist. And they've become relegated to either Category 2, which is banned, or Category 3, which requires additional information. Now, outside of this grandfathering, which was an easy way of getting your filters in, there is 4 mechanisms in which you can get approval of your ultraviolet filter. One is a citizen's petition. That never succeeded. I and my company actually tried to do that, not by introducing a new filter, but actually just trying to change the level that you could use octyl salicylate from 5% to 10, like homomethyl salicylate, which is almost an identical material. We told them they're identical, but homomethyl salicylate is allowed to 14%. The octyl salicylate is only 5. Could we increase it? It never happened. Then there was another process, which is known as the time and extent application, the TEA process. That is basically if an ingredient was approved in 5 other countries, in Europe or elsewhere, and for at least 5 years, and was safe and effective, we're going to bring it and approve it in the United States. Well, we submitted 8 ingredients, and none of them have been approved to date. We then went to Congress for that. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Then there is the traditional new drug application. Now, the new drug application, only 2 came through that process, which is avobenzone and Ekamsu. Herbert Laboratories did avobenzone, and L'Oreal did Ekamsu. Eventually, Herbert sold, and then Coppertone came in and did an amended NDA, and it's now in the Category 1 filters and approved for use for up to 3%. It is a UVA filter, but it's actually photo unstable, which we'll get to that later on. That process of NDA, or new drug application, is obviously a costly process, no less than $5 million. And it may take a year or 2 or maybe 5. And you take the chance that it may be after 3 years, it may be rejected. So the process of NDA has not been favorable for getting ultraviolet filters approved, because UV filters, their sales are in the millions of dollars, not in the billions of dollars. And so to spend 5-10 million and wait 4 or 5 years and maybe it doesn't get approved is not a venture that most venture capitalists want to do, unless if you really have something very interesting. And that was the process of avobenzone and ecamsul. Now, the final one is what the FDA is now requiring. It's basically, they're saying that your ingredient to be allowed as a filter, you have to be GRASI, generally regarded as safe and effective. And for GRASI satisfaction of the requirements of the GRASI issues, you need to do the MUST test and the DART test and a few other things which are kind of expensive, toxicity stuff and reproductive stuff. So this is how you can get a material approved by the FDA. These are 6 out of the 8 UV filters that were pending, and they're very useful and they're very well liked in Europe and Japan and the rest of the world, but we're not allowed to be using them in the United States. In fact, if you looked at the filters that we have today, here are the 11 that sort of survived, and out of the 11, 6 are UVA filters, zinc and titanium, even though titanium is really a UVB filter, I should drop it from there. But still, zinc and titanium are the only 2 GRASI approved ingredients in the USA today. All the others are category 3, which makes them potentially approved, but they are not yet approved. However, since they've been in commerce for the last 30 years, the FDA has allowed them to continue until they issue their administrative order, which should be coming not momentarily, but in the next couple of years, because of the environment changing. The political environment is changing around the FDA, and maybe that will happen. In the meantime, really, oxybenzone has some coral damage issues. It has some endocrine disrupting issues. Miradimate is never used it's a very weak UVA. Ecamsul is only for L'Oreal. Out of the UVB filters, there's some issues with them. They're mostly weak or very small molecules that penetrate the skin, and some issues around them, as well as octinoxate is not allowed. And so in reality, we are left with 6 UV filters that we could be using today. Avobenzone, which is the workhorse for UVA protection, but is a photo-unstable material. Everybody knows that, so it needs to be stabilized, and it's done with quenchers and other things. Homosalate, octosalate, and octocrylene are the only UVB filters allowed. Ecamsul is only for L'Oreal, and we're left with titanium and zinc oxide. So we have an issue in the sunscreen industry, especially one that if they stick to their guns and say only zinc and titanium are allowed, there's going to be a serious vacuum and a shortage of ingredients to come up with the protection that we have today. I'll move on to the next topic. Am I going too fast, or everything is fine? Okay, very good. You can ask if you have a question. Now, the performance testing, okay? So we have a number of tests that are done on the finished cosmetic, the sunscreen cosmetic right now. That's not the ultraviolet filter anymore. You're now looking at, we took a cosmetic, we added filters in it, it became a drug, we call it sunscreen, we can make claims that it protects you from cancer, etc. So there needs to be some drug claims and some drug testing done on it. The first is the SPF. This is the sun protection factor. It's an in vivo process, meaning it's done on humans or animals, but in this case, humans. and I'll say a few words about them. Then there's the water resistance test, which can be either a 40-minute or an 80-minute, depending on how much time you think your material will survive underwater. And that is also an in vivo human test. Then there's the UVA, UVB, which is we call the broad spectrum. And that's an in vitro test which does the critical wavelength, the CWL. You have to measure the critical wavelength, and I'll mention that in a minute. And then you have to test that it is a photostable material, that if you have unstable ingredients in your product, that you've stabilized them and that they will remain stable throughout the period of the shelf life of the material. Then you have to do a safety test, which is the HRIPT, the Human Repeat Insult Patch Test, that can be done on a minimum of 50 subjects, usually 100 or 200. And that's to make sure that your cosmetic, which of course has to be safe because it's a cosmetic and the safety of cosmetics has to be considered. In addition, we do an HRIPT on the sunscreen formulation. And finally, you can only manufacture this in an FDA good manufacturing practice GMP laboratory or production facility. And what you do is that after you manufacture it and put the ultraviolet filter in the cosmetic, you need to analyze the ingredients, the UV filters. You need to analyze for them. And this is done by either gas chromatography or high performance liquid chromatography, GC or HPLC. And then that's an additional test that you have what you said you put inside this material. Now, so the SPF in vivo human test, that's done on about 10 volunteers. And basically it used to be 20 and the FDA has dropped it down to 10 in the last 5 years. And basically you look at volunteers that have a Fitzpatrick skin type of 1, 2, or 3. Fitzpatrick from Harvard has made 5 categories. Basically, the higher the number, the darker your skin is. So we only test 1, 2, and 3 subjects. And there's supposed to be a mix of 1, 2, and 3, but that's where some of the errors can happen because you may be getting more 1s than 2s than 3s. And so there can be a variation between one laboratory and the other. Now, we have a test right now, which is called the individual topography angle, the ITA, and the numbers vary from 28 to 55. The higher the number, the more whiter your skin is. And so the 28 is for skin type 3, that's almost getting to be a little bit more than me, a little bit closer to darker. And so these are the people that we measure. Of course, you will have to give them more solar radiation to get an erythema if you are a darker skinned person than a lighter skinned person. So that's why we do that. Now, on the right-hand side is the solar simulator. We are not using the sun to test the sunscreen. We are using an artificial source, which is a xenon arc, and it emits radiation supposedly similar to the sun, but there are many variations in there. I'm sort of building up to why there will be inconsistencies. So the way you do the test is you assemble your panel, and you basically want to make sure that when you give them a dose, that it's not going to burn them. So you want to measure their MED, or the minimal erythemal dose. So you give them a little bit of a dose, a couple of them, and then they go home and they come back after a day, and then you measure it. And if you couldn't see it, then you need to give them more. And if you saw it, that's their minimum erythemal dose. And if you think you burnt them, God forbid, then you overdid it. So there's a few cases of like a mild burn that happens in the testing. But once you got your panel with, and you know what the minimal erythemal dose is going to be, you then expose them as I showed you in the previous slide. And we basically do a grid of 6. On the left, top left, we put a standard, which we know its efficiency in protection and its SPF. And on the right, the remaining 5, we put the cream or the lotion that you want to test, but then we give it a geometrically increasing dosages to each one of them. So one with a minimum, with a certain dose, the other one with a higher, and then you let them go home. And when they come back, you grade the darkness or the burning or the erythema. It's not a burning, but it's when the moment you see a slight reddening on their skin, then that's the erythema, and you record that. Well, you give them 2 milligrams per square centimeter, which is the minimum amount that you should be putting on your body, which turns out to be at least a shot glass of sunscreen per application. Now, when you come and you measure them, the FDA, as I said, allows you 10 subjects, not 20 anymore. And now the new regulations is that they don't want to see 32s and 65s and 72s and all those odd numbers. They've asked that the numbers remain in increments of 10 if they're high, and increments of 5 if they are lower than 30, and then anything below 15 is not a sunscreen anymore. The second test that we do is water resistance, which is identical to the previous one I just mentioned to you, and that is you give them the dosage, but then you allow them to go into a whirlpool, which is maintained at a certain temperature, and they sit in it for 40 minutes or 80 minutes, depending on whether you want to make a claim that your product is water resistance in 40 minutes or water resistance in 80 minutes. And then you take them back again and you measure their SPF one more time. And if the SPF is within 10%, then you are allowed to make the claim that your product is water resistance at 40 minutes or at 80, depending on how long you kept them in the water bath. The third test is the broad spectrum test. And that is an in vitro. So all you need is a machinery, which we have, or not us, but laboratories have. And they measure the critical wavelength. And if your critical wavelength is more than 370 nanometers, then you can say, I have a broad spectrum UVA protection on my label. Now, what is that? That is, you take the product and you run a UV spectrum, basically, an absorbance or a transmittance. And you can see the graph, the red graph. And basically, you then measure the area underneath that graph from 290 to 370, to hit 90%. So the area hits 90% of the total area that you have. At 370, then it's fine. At 375, it's beautiful. But if the 90% comes at 360, then you cannot say it's a broad spectrum protection. So it's basically the area under the curve from until you come up to 370, then you bring a line down to the axis of the wavelength and you measure what the number was, 371, 372, 373, the higher the better, and that's how your broad spectrum. Now this is going to change. The FDA has asked to tighten that spec. That spec, by the way, in Europe and the rest of the world, in Japan it's called the PA+4, and in Europe it's the Colipa test. It's done in vivo and in a different way, in vivo and in vitro. Here we only have the in vitro test, and they want to tighten it a little bit more. And so they are asking for it to be done slightly differently. And that is, you measure the UVA2 region. And the UVA2 region is between 340 and 400. You measure that, and you divide it by the total absorbance. And that, if it's more than 0.7, here's the equation. So the UVA over the total UV, 340 to 400 over the 290 to 400. And if the number is 0.7 or higher, then you say it's a broad coverage. So it's a little bit more sophisticated test than the critical wavelength, because it takes into account that are you getting some UVA2 protection, which is the one from 340 to 400 nanometers. In the past, we only looked at UVB, by the way, when the industry started. It was the UVB region we wanted to be protected from, because that's the erythemal, that's the burning region. But we never considered anything above 320. That we called the UVA. It's there, maybe you can be protected from it. It's good. Later on, we discovered that the UVA is actually more damaging than the UVB, because the UVA penetrates much deeper than the UVB. And even though it's weaker in energy, but going down to your genetic material in your body is not a good thing. And so UVA protection, or what we call now broad spectrum protection, is very important. So we have all of those things, but we see variations in SPF numbers throughout. In fact, for the popular press in New Zealand and Australia, you'll hear about them now. With the US and the rest of the world, you'll hear about them in May or June. And so that's because they're down under, they're in the summer right now in New Zealand and Australia. So there's like sunscreens don't meet the claims, and 5 out of 10 sunscreens were defective. And in Hong Kong was also another one, sunscreen products catch some heat over protection claims. You get that in the press all over. In the United States, you can see them in May here. Consumer Reports publishes its report in May, and they usually do testing. And they said that half of the products that they tested did not meet the SPF label. So it's kind of a serious thing, and it needs to be addressed. In fact, the politicians immediately jump on it, and Chuck Schumer said that he pushes in the FDA to test sunscreens and confirm the true SPF number and crack down on labels that promise protection but leave the consumer burned. So this is the topic of my sunscreen filter. Actually, Gay is the one who instigated me to, in addition to coming and talking to you, I decided to write about it. But as you can see, the title of this article, which is coming out next week, is actually solar protection via space. And that's where Jason comes in. His company, Liberty, has actually come up with some very interesting ingredients that cause UV A, B, C, HEV, and infrared protection. And they discovered that through working with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Houston, in which the shuttles, when they went out to the space station, they discovered that there was some bacteria remaining that was alive. When they brought them back in, it turns out to be a Bacillus lysate. The bacteria had mutated to be able to withstand UVC protection and UVB protection, the protection that is out in space, which was kind of, so they've isolated that, and they're coming up with interesting ingredients in the future. So as far as SPF testing discrepancy, okay, let me first start out by saying that the SPF test is obviously a relative test. It's not an absolute test. When you say I have SPF 10, that SPF 10 is only for you as an individual. It's different for me, different for anybody else in the room. It depends on their skin type. So an SPF 10 for me means that if I burn in 10 minutes, I can stay 10 times the amount of that, which is 100 minutes. So I can stay 100 minutes before I get burned. Whereas for Janelle, maybe it's 30 minutes, an SPF 10 will allow her, I'm sorry, I don't get burned in 10 minutes. I get burned in 30 minutes. So I can stay 300 minutes out. Janelle will burn in 10 minutes. And so she's allowed only an hour or an hour and a half before she gets burned. So it's a relative, not an absolute number. But of course, whatever's on the product should actually be what is expected. And so that there's no excuse, but I just wanted to let you know that this is not an absolute number. It is one that is not performed by machinery, where I can just put it in the machine like a GC or a UV, and I come up with 397, and that's different from 342. I don't have that efficiency. It is done through a human test, actually graded by humans. And actually, the sun is not involved. It's an artificial procedure. So the volunteers are, of course, you know, I remember we dropped it from 20 to 10, so there's less accuracy here. If there was 20, you would be more accurate. The volunteers have to be tested for any disorders, any drugs they take, the uneven tones, pigmentation, scar, how much hair, they actually remove the hair, and then they do the SPF. But you know that in a perfect world, there's going to be variations from one subject to the other. From where you put the sample in the back of that person is going to be different from one person to the other. So there's first variation potential. So I call it know that the sensitivity to ultraviolet is going to be different from one person to the other. And we're talking about hundreds of people to just do like one SPF or 2 SPF or 5 SPFs. The second problem is that the technician has to grade the burning. When is the first time that he saw burning or she saw burning? And that depends very much on the technician's experience. So from one laboratory to another, or from within the laboratory, if there are different technicians, you're going to be getting one person saying, I see the red, another person says, I don't see the red. So there's more dose in there. Now I see the red, and therefore an SPF is going to be different. A third potential problem is the spreadability. You're putting 2 milligrams per square centimeter on the back of a subject. It could be a cream, it could be a lotion, it could be a gel, it could be a wax, it could be an oil, it could be a spray. And the spreadability, depending upon the viscosity, is going to be quite variable. Some remains on his finger when he's applying it, some is totally in there, some evaporates. There is some variability in there. Now, of course, experienced people know how to handle that stuff, but one laboratory may be different from the other. Now, a fourth and a fifth very important potential problems is the formulation itself. And I'll tell you something about it in a second. But in addition is the solar simulator. The solar simulator, which is an artificial thing, is a 150-watt xenon arc simulator. And it has a continuous emission spectrum from 290 to 400, theoretically, if it's really, really well calibrated. In fact, it always has a little bit below 290, and it always has a little bit above 400. So it's not a perfect, from 290 to 400 is what we're subjecting the consumer to. The consumer or the panelist is getting traces. Now, we do that with filters, and we try to put the filters to block anything below 290 and filters to block anything above 400, but there's always a slight variation. The calibration of that machine is also got to be done at least twice a year, and that is very crucial. As far as the formulation, the sunscreen formulation itself, we found that mineral sunscreens, the inorganic particulates, the zinc and titanium, generally have more variations in SPF claims than the regular UV absorbing organic filters. And it's obvious. The inorganic particulates are solids. They may or may not be dispersed well. There may be some crystalline remaining. There may be some spaces in between them. They may be micronized. They may have a particular size and a total size that is different. So how many nanograms do we have? And the aggregate size. So there's variations amongst the inorganic particulates, but they are very popular these days. First of all, if the FDA goes with their prediction that only those two are allowed, that's the only game in town, but which I kind of doubt will happen. But they're popular because it's perceived that they don't have actually effect on coral reefs, and they are more stable. All of those are issues which are debatable, by the way. So in addition to that, the rheology, which I was alluding to, the spreadability of the product, whether it's a cream or a lotion or a spray or an aerosol, that will cause variations. Now, some sun care lines, especially the anti-aging ones, have anti-inflammatory ingredients. They have antioxidants that could or could not be lowering the reactive oxygen species on your skin. An anti-inflammatory is actually going to make your skin redden less. So it actually makes your erythema dose will have to be higher to see the redness, because anti-inflammatories are in your product. You shouldn't have them in sunscreens, but some have them. And finally, photostability. So if the material is not photostable, then when they first tested it in the laboratory, it gave them an SPF 30. But when Consumer Reports got it after 6 months, well within the stability of the material, they come out with 15 or 17, because possibly it is not photostable in the final formulation. So it's my discussion here is not meant to discourage everybody, because that's the only game in town, and it's been working reasonably well for us. It has been giving some excellent advice to consumers. They've generally been adhering to it. Every once in a while, there is a mother that is complaining that her child was burnt when he had a lot of sunscreen on their body. So keep in mind that this is a relative test, but there has to be another call from all of the cosmetic sunscreen companies and from us who are advocates, that we have to tell the consumer that you cannot totally rely on a sunscreen. It's an excellent form of protection, but you need to be wearing adequate clothing. You need those umbrellas and the hats and the glasses, and definitely avoid the 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. That's only logical and should be drilled into the minds of the consumer. And I'm not saying not to rely on a sunscreen, definitely rely on a sunscreen, because we love the outdoors. We want to be outside. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel healthy, even if it's perceived, but we want to be protected from the outside damage. And the outside damage, believe it or not, is not just the ultraviolet radiation. It does include a little bit of the visible, which we call the HEV, the high energy visible radiation, which is from 400 to about 500. So why does it stop at 400 nanometers in the UV? It doesn't. So it goes on to the about 500 or more. So there's some HEV protection that needs to be done. Lately, there's a lot of data that shows that infrared, which is much, much weaker in energy, is also a cause of some problems. And the infrared has one particular one which I like to tell people about, and that is when you go out and into the sun and you feel the warmth, that's your infrared radiation. In the kitchens or the bathrooms, there's usually an infrared light which makes you, if you come out of the shower, you can dry out very quickly. Saunas have infrared to cause the heat. So infrared causes heat, and heat may not be an ionizing radiation, but heat will make your skin sort of sensitized for now UV radiation to cause more damage than not. And remember that infrared radiation is half of the solar radiation. 50% or more of the solar radiation that you get whenever you go out in the sun is from infrared. And so infrared, now we know, causes reactive oxygen species and requires some antioxidants and requires some protection from it. And my final topic, to sum up, is the US Sunscreen Landscape. And I have a feeling I'm using the old slides, but are we there yet? And very definitely we're not. We formed a lobby group called the PASS Coalition, which is to pass safe sunscreens. And that was a lobby group in Washington. We did like the gun lobby, we did like the pharmaceutical lobby. We were lobbying Congress for better protection. And we were in particular very irritated by the fact that we couldn't get any of the TEA ingredients approved, those 8 filters that are used everywhere in the world, and they're very effective UVA filters. So we lobbied Congress, we met with congressmen, we met with senators, we got them to finally unanimously issue a Sunscreen Innovation Act, the SIA. And that was signed by President Obama November 26, 2014. And in it was many provisions. The first was that the FDA has to make a decision within 5 years on those TEA ingredients. Will you allow them or will you not allow them? Well, within 6 months, the FDA came back and said, we're not allowing any of them, so take them off the table. No discussion. Right now, they may be in play, but at the time, they basically said, no discussion. We are not going to approve any of them unless they pass the must test and the DART test, and a few other things that brings it higher. Remember, the UV filter industry does not have proprietary ingredients in it anymore. These are all ingredients dating back to the 70s or earlier, and they have no father. There is no patent on any of them except Icamsul, which is expiring. And so there is no one supplier. There's about 10 suppliers. You can go to China, you can go to Korea, you can go to India, you can go anywhere and get this material for dirt cheap dirt cheap prices. And so there's no advocate. Nobody is going to go and spend $5 million to get octyl salicylate approved. So that's the story there. And so I lost my train of thought, but I'll get back to it, I'm sure. So anyway, I lost my train of thought. So let me see what is on this slide. FDA must.
You were talking
okay, so
about
we are trying to. I'm sorry?
We're talking about lobbying.
Right. So we lobbied them. They issued the SIA. They immediately said, no, the TEAs are not going to be allowed. The second provision in the SIA was that within 5 years, they have to issue a final monograph. So the final monograph meant 5 years later was November 26, 2019. And in February 2019, the FDA came up with a lot of flurries and of data, and we're coming up with the final monograph so that in November 2019, we will issue the final monograph. And then we had a bombshell. And the bombshell was a Journal of the American Medical Association study, which was 2 of them. One was in 2019 and one was in 2020. And in 2019, they basically tested a number of ingredients with the must test. So they tested avobenzone, oxybenzone, octocrylene, and Icamsul. The must test, the maximum utilization trial, cannot have more than 0.5 nanograms per ml permeation into the skin, into the blood. Well, they found, take a look at oxybenzone. They found 209 in a spray, 194 in another spray, 169 in a lotion. That is 400 times the level that the FDA deemed safe. So there was a series of problems. And here is the second, oh, I don't have this. The second study is supposed to be here, and this is my old slides. But the second study tested 4 other ingredients and came up with basically the same result, that UV, the ultraviolet filters that we have in possession today and we're allowed to use, actually permeate the bloodstream theoretically at levels that exceed the safety. So of course the FDA came in and said, well, the results don't mean that you cannot use them, but we are going to be issuing an administrative order in the future to decide whether they will be used or not. And the PCPC, which is our Sunscreen and Cosmetic Association, the Personal Products Association, said that we're going to be doing testing on 8 of those ingredients, must tests, and hopefully they will report different numbers. I'm not very optimistic, but that is the situation today. In addition, in Hawaii and in other places, they are basically labeling sunscreens that have the organically, and that's not organically certified like NOHBA, the organic molecules. There are inorganic molecules like zinc and titanium, and there's organic molecules, which is the rest of the molecules that are in the bodies and in humans and in everything else. And they said that those ingredients, particular oxybenzone and octinoxate, cannot have been causing damage to the coral reefs. And in many ways, that law was just come into law January 1. You're not allowed to bring in any product or buy any product that contains octinoxate or oxybenzone in Hawaii. There are other municipalities, including Florida and California and Palau and other islands, that are looking into banning it. And basically what that is doing is that it's just causing some agita for the sun care industry. While we're in the midst of the coronavirus and very, very busy worrying and really sick to death, and some people died, 500,000 or 400,000 already, there was a corona relief or a CARES Act that was issued by Congress. It was issued in March 27. And way and behold, I'm gonna hang up on this call. And way and behold, I kicked everybody out from my office, by the way. So I only come to my office when nobody's here, which is basically from 5 o'clock in the morning till 10. Then they can come in, I leave them notes and go home. Anyway, and then I work at home. It's not that I don't work at home. So on March 27, they issued this CARES Act, which gave money to everybody, gave the PPP loans to the companies, and had a major effect. And in the middle of it, like page 170, there was a OTC drug review. And in that OTC drug review, they basically said the FDA is now going to be making final decisions. We're not going to get involved. In fact, the Sunscreen Innovation Act is going to be, what was the word for it? I thought it was a beautiful English word, which escapes me right now, but it's not going to be allowed anymore. It's going to be, next year, it's going to not be a law anymore. And they gave the FDA the power of administrative order, or an AO. The AO, you don't have to discuss it with anybody. there's no meetings with people concerned, the FDA can issue arbitrarily an AO that this ingredient is allowed, that ingredient is not allowed, and you cannot appeal that process. They also said the FDA is allowed to charge money for allowing UV filters to be approved, for allowing UV filter percentages to be changed, and basically they came up with two fees, one which is $500,000, known as the OMUFA, which is the OTC monograph user fee application. If you want to include a new ingredient, you have to foot a $500,000 bill, then go and do your NDA. And the other one is the OMOR, which is that you are asking that they make minor changes in the OTC monograph order request. So we have a new administration that just came in yesterday. It was very exciting to watch yesterday. And there's new HHS secretary that has been appointed. Alex Azar is no longer the HHS secretary. Biden, who was responsible for the space moonshot. And the moonshot was to treat cancers, especially skin cancer. And so we expect some changes are going to happen at the FDA. The FDA commissioner has not yet been released or relieved, or a new one came into place, but eventually maybe, whatever it is, the HHS secretary is going to be administering, and we think that things may be changing in the future. So I wanted to thank everybody here. I will take any questions. I usually, if I don't get questions, I usually credit myself. I don't say that it's because you're not interested. I say because I did a good job. So nevertheless, if I didn't do a good job, ask me any question. And if you don't want to talk now, you can contact me at nadim@alpharnd.com. And as usual, I have to bring in my book. Has won 2 awards, and I'm making it available for $25 today, or for anybody who attended the seminar. And you can just call me at Nadim or write to me, and I'll deliver it to your house for $25 if you're interested in essential oils. Gay, your call.
There's a couple of questions that people have put up.
I didn't go there, so
okay, I'll just read them off. So Janelle asked if you would define the difference between sunscreen and sunblock.
Okay, sunblock is a term that we no longer should be using. There's no such thing as sunblock anymore, because it's basically saying that you're blocking all the radiation. There is no such animal available, whether it's your clothes, or you sitting not in the sun but in the shade, or you using a sunscreen of SPF 100 or 200. You will always have UV. And I have the calculations if you wanted me to show you that. Did you want to see that, or you believe me? Okay, so there's no sunblock.
We believe you.
Okay, so it's a sunscreen at this point.
And then another question from Jennifer Schweitzer. I heard something about a new requirement for animal testing in relation to sunscreen ingredients. Do you have an update on this?
Animal testing. Well, the animal testing is in the cosmetics industry. Some companies still do animal testing. If you don't want that, you're going to need to ask your supplier if your product has been animal tested or not. And generally, you will find most ingredients that can be supplied as without animal testing. But animal testing still goes on, and it is one way in which people rely on the safety of those ingredients before you experiment on humans. They go on animals, and they basically say that they are, we do it humanely, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not an advocate of that, but basically that is a potential
Hey, Nadim. My question was specifically in relation to approval of some of the new ingredients. I think what I was hearing was that animal testing would be a requirement to get it approved. So therefore, like if you're trying to do Leaping Bunny certified, you know, that would be a problem because you would be knowingly using an ingredient that has recently been animal tested.
That is correct. And the answer is that most of the toxicology and genetic testing does require some animal testing. And if the FDA puts that as a requirement, such as the DART test, developmental and reproductive testing, then that's a toxicity, then that is a potential problem for people not wanting to use those ingredients that may come down the pipeline.
Have they required it, or is this something that?
No, it's not. Nothing has been required to date.
Okay.
In fact, the recommendations that the SPFs be increments of 10 and 5 is not a requirement yet. It's when the final monograph is going to be issued, and the final monograph is going to be coming in bits and drabs and small amounts. It's going to be an AO process, the administrative order process, which should be happening soon. They're going to tell us about the ingredients that are now category 1, not 3. And they're going to tell us that they've approved some of them as is without animal testing, or they're going to say they will be remaining as 3, category 3, until they do the following tests. And then we would know what those tests are, and we will let you know if they require animal testing or not. So the ingredients that we have today have not been animal tested. The UV filters, if they have, it's maybe 50 years ago. They have not been tested on animals, so they're okay. But the FDA does not allow them at this point. They're not category 1, they're category 3. And category 3 means technically they shouldn't be used until further testing. But the category 3 today means you could use it until we tell you you cannot.
So just a note, as we all know, I think China requires animal testing, but then the EU prohibits animal testing. But then I saw, and there's some exceptions to that, honestly. Then I saw this morning that France somehow has negotiated with China that they don't have to do animal testing. Just putting that out there. There was an article in one of the newsletters that comes out regarding that. And that it's kind of separate from our subject matter here. And then somebody is asking about blue light. And could you speak to blue light? Yeah, I'm very curious about that too.
Yeah, blue light is the high energy visible, the HEV I was talking about. That's the blue light, because your visible radiation is violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, the VIBGUR or Roy G. Biv, depending on how you look at it. So the violet is at 400 nanometers. The blue is about 500 nanometers. So between 400 and 500 nanometers, red is 800. Infrared is beyond 800, okay? So from 400 to 800 is your violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. And in the first part next to the UV is the blue light, or the HEV light. So you need some protection from that. We've seen that there's a lot of reactive oxygen species emanate from there. In addition, they are longer wavelength than the ultraviolet, and therefore they penetrate even further, but they are much weaker radiation than the ultraviolet. So it's like a balance. They're not as strong, but they penetrate deeper. So does the penetration deeper and going into the DNA, is they have enough energy to cause mutations of the DNA? That is an unknown question at this point. So prudency is that you need to protect from it. And the minimum you need to do is remove those reactive oxygen species that are on your skin when you are exposed to that with sunscreen, and that is done usually with antioxidants, and that can be done reasonably effective, or with new HEV filters, which may be the interesting thing that may be coming in the near future. And I hate to say it, it seems like, we're just going to be slathering more stuff on the consumer to get total protection. So it's a balance for the consumer. They have to decide how much sun they want, how much feeling better they want to feel. But at the same time, you can't avoid it. You go to work and you have it, and you go to, you sit in the shade and you're getting it. You're in the clouds and you're getting it. So you have to have some sort of protection, and sunscreens does provide for that.
And sorry, one more question on that. So for HEV filters that you're mentioning, are those?
Yes. They're not available yet.
So there's
They're
no
not available
like zinc
yet.
oxide, titanium, those are not
Okay,
helping.
wait, I'm sorry, I apologize. Some forms of titanium dioxide, I'm sorry, zinc oxide, not titanium. Titanium dioxide sort of dies around 360 nanometers. Zinc oxide goes all the way to about 400, and some forms of micronized zinc oxide has a tail that protects from the HEV. There are a number of products on the market today that actually say that we have HEV protection. 3/4 of them actually have antioxidants, and they claim HEV protections. 1/4 of them will have maybe the zinc oxide in the proper micronized form that protects a little bit from the HEV. So I do apologize. Yes, the zinc oxide in its special forms, which are not the ones that everybody buys, have some tail protection in the HEV, which is better than nothing else.
So that's interesting. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
When you say antioxidants, give a couple of examples, please, because
you mean custom company examples?
Well, when you say antioxidant to me,
resveratrol. All of the traditional ubiquinones, the THBQ, BHA, BHT. A lot of that stuff is in a lot of consumer products today, and they tell you, look at your labels now. They will tell you, oh, we got this and this antioxidant, grapeseed, and whatever. So there's a number of those available. Who's more effective? I can't comment on that.
No, not that, but like a tocopherol is an
and tocopherol is helpful.
Okay.
The vitamin A is helpful. Vitamin C is good too. So there's a lot of ingredients that are useful. I didn't give you an exhaustive list, but there's a lot of them. This is a whole new topic. I don't know if you see my bookshelf. It's half of it is antioxidants. So okay. I can pull out about 100 ingredients and tell you about them right now.
But how do we measure the antioxidant level and to know, okay, if I have this amount of antioxidant in my product, then it may actually protect? Like, are there any tests available?
There are many tests. There's the ORAC test, which is expensive. There are other tests which use dyes. And so there are a lot of tests which, if you're launching a product, consult somebody who knows a little bit about antioxidants. I'm not your guy, but consult somebody who knows more about antioxidants and will tell you, do X, Y, and Z. There are tests available.
We'll look for that person for the next webinar.
Maybe so. Yes, there is. I can give you the name of.
Give me some. Just email me some names.
I will email you. I think McCullen is wonderful. You might know him, Gay. He's out in our area. He used to be with Croda, but I don't know where he is right now. He's excellent, and he has a book on antioxidants. So you might want to go there. Or, there are a lot of consultants out there that I can't be recommending on air.
Okay, we'll find somebody.
Wonderful. Okay, I think I went a little bit more than I wanted to, but I hope it was useful to everybody. And contact me if you need more information. And Gay, decide to close or to continue?
Oh, no, we'll close it down. I just want to thank you. Remember, everybody, this will be on the NOHBA YouTube channel. And Thank you so much. It was excellent. There are all kinds of other comments here thanking you and saying how useful this information was. So I really appreciate your time and sharing this information.
My pleasure. I would recommend that you read the article that's coming out in Happy Magazine called The Sunscreen Filter. It should be out on February 1. You can get a free subscription if I'm not mistaken. If you don't have that, it's Household and Personal Products Industry.
HPPI.
So, yeah, that gives you, and I write the columns there regularly. So if you're interested in sunscreens, you might want to reach out there.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Everybody have a wonderful rest of your weeks. And
thank you. Take care, folks. Okay.
bye.
Bye-bye.